For years, I walked through those hospital corridors in silence, wearing my scrubs like any other nurse. Nobody asked questions. Nobody imagined that before holding syringes and patient charts, I held weapons in missions I can never fully describe. My past was locked in a drawer I swore never to open again, until the day the chief surgeon burst through the emergency room doors, covered in blood, and shouted a name I hadn't heard in over a decade, my call sign. What happened after that moment changed everything, and the truth I had hidden for so long finally came to light in a way I never expected. This is my story, and I guarantee you won't believe half of what I'm about to tell you. My name is Valerie Cross, and if you saw me today, you'd see just another nurse at Seattle Grace Memorial Hospital, someone who checks vitals, administers medications, comforts patients in their worst moments. You'd see the dark circles under my eyes from double shifts, the coffee stains on my scrubs, the tired smile I give to families waiting for news about their loved ones. You wouldn't see the scars hidden beneath my sleeves, or the nightmares that still wake me up at 3 a.m, drenched in sweat, reaching for a weapon that isn't there anymore. I moved to Seattle 5 years ago from San Diego, leaving behind a life I can barely talk about even now. The rain here is constant, heavy, nothing like the dry heat of the desert where I spent most of my 20s. I chose this city specifically because nobody knew me, nobody asked about my past, and the gray skies matched the way I felt inside. Starting over isn't as simple as the movies make it seem. You can change your address, your job, even your daily routine, but you can't change what's carved into your bones. The hospital became my sanctuary, the place where I could finally do something good without question marks hanging over every decision. My colleagues think I'm quiet, maybe a bit strange because I never join them for happy hour or talk about my personal life. They don't know that socializing feels dangerous, that getting close to people means they might ask questions I'm not ready to answer. Dr. Patricia Chen, the ER attending, once told me I have the calmest hands she's ever seen during a crisis. If only she knew where that calm came from. Most days blend together in a rhythm of routine: morning rounds, medication administration, patient education, charting. I'm good at my job, maybe too good. Last month, during a multi-vehicle accident, I triaged 15 patients in under 10 minutes while everyone else was still processing the chaos. My supervisor praised my efficiency, but I saw the questions in her eyes. How does a nurse with only 5 years of experience move like that? Why don't high-pressure situations seem to faze me at all? The truth is, I've seen worse, much worse, but that's a story I've kept buried, wrapped in classified documents and memories I wish I could forget. At least I kept it buried until everything changed. Until he walked through those doors and called me by a name that belonged to someone I used to be, someone I tried so hard to leave behind in the sand and blood of another life entirely. Before I continue, I want to know something from you. Where are you watching this story from? It's always incredible to see people from so many different places following these accounts. Write it in the comments. I really want to know. 10 years ago, I wasn't Valerie Cross the nurse. I was Lieutenant Valerie Cross, Navy SEAL, one of the first women to complete the program after it opened to female candidates. The training almost killed me, literally. Hell Week, where you sleep maybe 4 hours total across 5 days, where your body screams for mercy and your mind plays tricks on you, where quitting is as simple as ringing a bell 3 times. I watched grown men, warriors, ring that bell. I refused to be one of them. My team called me Phantom because I moved through operations like a ghost, silent, efficient, deadly when necessary. We deployed to places you've heard about on the news, but never understood the real story behind the headlines. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. Sand that got into everything. Heat that made you question if your blood was actually boiling, and danger that never slept. Every mission carried the weight of lives in the balance, not just ours but countless others depending on decisions we made in split seconds. The mission that changed everything happened in a small village outside Kandahar. We were extracting a high-value target, an operative with intelligence that could prevent multiple terrorist attacks. Everything was going according to plan until it wasn't. An IED we didn't detect, planted in a building we thought was clear. The explosion threw me 15 feet, and when the ringing in my ears finally stopped, I heard screaming, not the enemy. Our team medic, Lieutenant Marcus Reeves. He was trapped under debris, his leg crushed, arterial bleeding that would kill him in minutes without intervention. The building was unstable, could collapse any second. My team leader ordered us to pull back, to leave him because extracting him would risk everyone else. Standard protocol in combat situations. You don't sacrifice the many for the one. I looked at Marcus, at his eyes meeting mine, and I made a choice that would haunt me forever. I went back. Against orders, against protocol, against everything I'd been trained to do. I pulled him out, tourniquet applied with one hand while dragging him with the other, bullets ricocheting off walls around us. We made it to the extraction point, and Marcus survived. But 2 other members of my team died covering my unauthorized rescue, Sergeant James Wu and Corporal David Martinez. Good men with families, with futures, Gone because I couldn't follow orders. The Navy called it valor under fire and gave me a commendation. My team called it exactly what it was, insubordination that cost lives. The guilt ate at me like acid. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw James and David, heard their families crying at the funerals. I couldn't reconcile being called a hero when I felt like a failure. The nightmares started, the hypervigilance, the inability to connect with anyone because I was afraid any decision I made might hurt them too. After 18 months of psychological evaluation and medical leave, I resigned. The Navy tried to convince me to stay, but I couldn't wear that uniform anymore. I moved across the country, enrolled in an accelerated nursing program, and became someone new, someone who saves lives without guns, without impossible choices, without watching friends die because of decisions I made, or so I thought. If this story is gripping you as much as it marked me, take a moment now and subscribe to the channel. We're close to reaching 500 subscribers, and your subscription makes all the difference so more people can discover emotional stories like this one. I earned 5 years passed in Seattle without incident, 5 years of carefully constructed normalcy. I rented a small apartment in Capitol Hill, lived alone, kept my routines predictable and safe. Work, gym, home, repeat. Sometimes I'd walk along Pike Place Market on my days off, watching tourists take photos with the flying fish, smelling the coffee from the original Starbucks, feeling almost human in the crowd's anonymity. Almost. The hospital became my entire world, and I preferred it that way. Night shifts suited me best because they're quieter, fewer questions, fewer expectations of small talk. You just work. My colleagues knew the basics, that I came from California, that I didn't have family nearby, that I was reliable when things got crazy. They didn't know about the locked safe in my closet containing a Navy Cross medal I never looked at, dog tags I couldn't throw away, and a photo of my old team that felt like staring at ghosts. Tuesday started like any other shift. I clocked in at 6 in the evening, received report from the day nurse about our patient load, 2 post-surgical patients, 1 cardiac monitoring case, 3 general medical admits, nothing unusual. Dr. Chen was the attending, which I preferred because she trusted my judgment and didn't micromanage. The ER was moderately busy, the kind of controlled chaos that kept you alert, but not overwhelmed. Around 8 o'clock, everything changed. A massive pileup on Interstate 5 during rush hour, 18 vehicles involved, multiple casualties. The first ambulance call came through, and suddenly we weren't preparing for a calm night anymore. All hands on deck, every available staff member mobilized, trauma bays cleared and ready. This was the kind of situation that separated experienced healthcare workers from everyone else. The ambulances started arriving in waves. A mother with a head injury clutching a crying toddler, a teenager with a fractured femur screaming in pain, an elderly man in respiratory distress from airbag deployment. I moved between patients with practiced efficiency, starting IVs, assessing injuries, calling out vital signs to doctors who were juggling multiple crises simultaneously. My hands stayed steady, my voice calm, my mind processing information faster than I could consciously think about it. That's when I noticed Dr. Patterson, a newer resident, freezing up. He was standing over a patient with a tension pneumothorax, collapsed lung that would be fatal without immediate intervention, but he couldn't move. His hands were shaking, his face pale. Without thinking, I stepped in, grabbed the needle decompression kit, and talked him through the procedure with the authority that came from somewhere beyond nursing school. The patient's oxygen saturation improved immediately, crisis averted. Dr. Chen caught the whole thing. I saw her watching me with that expression again, the one that said she was trying to figure out who I really was. A nurse shouldn't move like that, shouldn't take command like that, shouldn't have that kind of composure when everyone else is barely holding it together. I avoided her gaze, documented my interventions, and tried to blend back into the background where I belonged. But some bells can't be unrung. Some truths have a way of surfacing no matter how deep you bury them. And mine was about to explode into the open in the most unexpected way possible, with the arrival of someone I never thought I'd see again, someone whose life I saved and who saved mine right back by giving me a reason to believe in second chances. If this part moved you as much as it moved me, leave your like now. That way YouTube understands that this story deserves to be seen by more people, and that helps the channel continue growing. Doanlam. It was 10:30 when the call came through. Single vehicle accident, driver in critical condition, ETA 3 minutes. We cleared Trauma Bay 2 and assembled the team. Standard procedure. I was assigned to assist, which meant staying ready for whatever walked through those doors. You learn quickly in emergency medicine that you can't predict anything. The patient described over the radio never matches the reality that arrives. The ambulance pulled up, and paramedics rushed in with a stretcher. The patient was a man in his early 40s, unconscious, significant facial trauma, possible internal injuries. He was wearing an expensive suit now soaked with blood, and there was something about his build, his hands, that felt familiar in a way I couldn't immediately place. We moved him to the trauma bay, and I started cutting away his clothing while Dr. Chen called out orders. That's when he opened his eyes. Disoriented, clearly concussed, he looked around the room trying to focus. His gaze landed on me, and I watched recognition dawn across his face. Impossible recognition because I'd changed my hair, gained weight, looked nothing like the soldier he'd known a decade ago. But something in my eyes, my movements, triggered his memory. His hand shot out and grabbed my wrist with surprising strength for someone in his condition. "Phantom," he whispered, and the entire room went silent. I froze. That name, my call sign, the identity I'd shed like dead skin, spoken aloud in this hospital where I'd built an entirely new life. Time seemed to stop. Dr. Chen looked at me with confusion. The other nurses stared. The resident paused mid-examination, and I stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe, watching my past and present collide in the worst possible way. "It's you," he continued, his voice getting stronger despite his injuries. "Lieutenant Cross, you saved my life in Kandahar." And that's when I recognized him. Dr. Marcus Reeves, the team medic I'd pulled from that collapsed building, the man whose life I'd saved at the cost of 2 others, the reason I'd left the Navy and tried to become someone else entirely. He'd been appointed as Seattle Grace's new chief surgeon just weeks ago, but I'd avoided the introductory meetings, kept my head down, never made the connection. Now here he was, bleeding on my trauma table, saying things that would unravel everything. "I think you're confused from the head injury," I said quietly, professionally, trying to salvage the situation. "My name is Valerie Cross. I'm a nurse here. Let's focus on getting you stabilized." But Marcus shook his head, wincing at the pain the movement caused. "No confusion. I'd recognize you anywhere. The way you move, your eyes, everything. Phantom, the SEAL who defied orders to pull me out of hell. I looked for you after my recovery, but you disappeared, resigned. Nobody would tell me where you went." Dr. Chen stepped forward, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Dr. Reeves, you've sustained significant head trauma. We need to—" "I know what I'm saying," Marcus interrupted, his doctor voice cutting through despite his condition. "She's not just a nurse. She's a decorated Navy SEAL, one of the first women to complete the program. I'm alive because of her courage, and 2 good men died because of the choice she made to save me. I've lived with that knowledge every single day for 10 years. The room felt like it was spinning. Every carefully constructed wall I'd built was crumbling. My colleagues were staring at me like I was a stranger, which I suppose I was. I'd worked alongside these people for 5 years, shared shifts, saved lives together, and they'd never known the first true thing about who I really was. The betrayal in their eyes hurt more than I expected. "Is it true?" Dr. Chen asked softly. "Were you really a Navy SEAL?" I looked at Marcus, at his battered face and apologetic eyes, at the truth spilling out despite my best efforts to contain it. I could lie, claim he was confused, maintain the fiction a little longer, but what would be the point? The secret was out, and there's no putting that particular genie back in the bottle. So I did something I hadn't done in 5 years. I told the truth. "Yes," I said simply. "It's true. My name is Valerie Cross, and before I became a nurse, I was a Navy SEAL for 8 years. Lieutenant, decorated for valor, discharged under complicated circumstances. Dr. Reeves is the man I rescued during my last mission overseas. And now, if you'll excuse me, we have a patient to treat. Personal history can wait until he's stable." I turned back to my work, checking his vital signs, adjusting his oxygen, doing my job like always. But nothing would ever be the same again, and we all knew it. The carefully maintained separation between who I was and who I am had just been destroyed, and I had no idea what would happen next. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical procedures and whispered conversations. We stabilized Marcus. No internal bleeding. Concussion protocol initiated, facial lacerations sutured, observation overnight required. He kept trying to apologize, to explain, but I couldn't hear it yet. I was too busy processing the fact that my entire carefully constructed identity had been shattered in front of my colleagues. After we transferred Marcus to a private room, Dr. Chen pulled me aside into an empty conference room. Her face was serious, but not angry, which somehow made it worse. Anger I could handle. Disappointment was harder. She sat down and gestured for me to do the same, but I remained standing. Old habits. SEALs stand at attention when being questioned. 5 years, she said quietly. 5 years we've worked together, and you never mentioned any of this. Why? I crossed my arms. A defensive posture I recognized but couldn't stop. Would you have? If you had a past you wanted to escape, would you advertise it? I came here to start over, to be someone different. A nurse, not a soldier. Someone who saves lives without carrying a weapon. That's all I wanted. But you weren't just any soldier, Dr. Chen continued. You were a Navy SEAL. Do you understand how incredible that is? How rare? And you hid it like it was something shameful. It is shameful, I shot back, the words bitter. 2 men died because of a decision I made. James Wu had a wife and 2 daughters. David Martinez was engaged, planning a wedding. They're dead. Instead, because I chose to save one life instead of following orders that would have kept them safe. You call that incredible? I call it a failure I have to live with every single day. The confession hung in the air between us. I'd never said those words out loud before, never admitted the depth of my guilt to anyone. Dr. Chen's expression softened, and I hated that too. The pity, the understanding, all of it. I didn't want compassion. I wanted to do my job and be left alone with my ghost. You saved Dr. Reeves, she said after a long moment. That has to count for something. Does it? Does one life saved equal 2 lives lost? How do you do that math, Dr. Chen? Because I've been trying to figure it out for a decade, and I still can't make the numbers work. Before she could respond, there was a knock on the door. Nancy Williams, the hospital administrator, entered with 2 security personnel. My stomach dropped. This was it. The investigation, the questions, probably termination. Hospitals don't like secret, especially ones involving military backgrounds and hidden identities. Ms. Cross, Nancy said formally, we need to discuss your employment situation. You falsified your background check. You failed to disclose relevant information about your past. That's grounds for immediate dismissal. I nodded, accepting the inevitable. I understand. I'll clean out my locker and leave tonight. Wait, Dr. Chen interjected. She didn't falsify anything. She disclosed her nursing credentials, which are legitimate. She never claimed not to have a military background. She simply didn't volunteer information that wasn't requested. There's a difference. Nancy frowned. Semantics, Patricia. The issue is trust. How can we trust someone who's been hiding such a significant part of their identity? How can you not? Another voice said from the doorway. Marcus stood there, against medical advice apparently, still in his hospital gown with bandages covering half his face. Valerie Cross is one of the most trustworthy people I've ever met. She risked everything to save my life when she didn't have to. When doing so went against direct orders. If you fire her, you're making a mistake. Dr. Reeves, you should be in bed, Nancy started, but Marcus waved her off. I'm the chief surgeon at this hospital, and I'm telling you that Nurse Cross is an asset, not a liability. Her military training makes her better at her job, not worse. I've watched the security footage from tonight's mass casualty event. She was calm, efficient, and saved lives because of skills that came from her SEAL training. Fire her if you want, but you'll regret it. The room fell silent. Nancy looked between Marcus, Dr. Chen, and me, clearly calculating the political implications. A new chief surgeon defending an employee publicly creates complications, but so does keeping someone with a hidden military background. I could see her weighing the options, trying to find the path of least resistance. We'll continue this conversation tomorrow, Nancy finally said. Ms. Cross, you're suspended pending a full investigation, with pay for now. Don't leave town, and don't discuss this situation with anyone outside this room. Understood? I nodded, numb, suspended. Not fired, but not vindicated either. Just floating in professional limbo, while strangers picked apart my past and decided my future. Marcus tried to catch my eye as I left the conference room, but I couldn't look at him. He'd meant well, but his revelation had still destroyed everything I'd built here. I went to the locker room, sat on the bench in the silence, and finally let myself feel the weight of what had happened. My secret was out. My colleagues would never look at me the same way, and somewhere in this hospital was the man whose life I'd saved, who'd inadvertently returned the favor by exposing me, and I didn't know whether to thank him or hate him for it. The next morning, I sat in Nancy Williams' office with 2 HR representatives and a lawyer from the hospital's legal department. They'd pulled my entire file, nursing school transcripts, background checks, employment history, everything. On paper, I was clean. I'd never lied on any official documents. I'd simply omitted information that wasn't specifically requested, walked the razor-thin line between honesty and deception. Walk us through your military service, the lawyer said, her pen poised over a legal pad. Start from the beginning. So I did. I told them about enlisting at 20 after a childhood in foster care, about having no family and nothing to lose, about basic training at Great Lakes, about volunteering for SEAL training when the program opened to women, about being one of 3 who made it through out of 18 who started. I kept my voice flat, clinical, describing my service like I was reading someone else's personnel file. I told them about deployments, about classified missions I still couldn't discuss in detail, about the rhythm of military life and the brotherhood that comes from trusting people with your life every single day. I told them about Marcus, about the explosion, about the choice I made to go back for him against direct orders, about James Wu and David Martinez, about their deaths, about the guilt that followed me like a shadow. After their funerals, I couldn't function, I continued, my voice starting to crack despite my best efforts. I'd wake up in cold sweats, reaching for weapons that weren't there. I couldn't make decisions without second-guessing everything, wondering if this choice would get someone else killed. The Navy psychiatrist diagnosed PTSD, recommended extended leave. I knew I couldn't go back, so I resigned. Why nursing? The HR representative asked. Because I still wanted to save lives, but I needed it to be different. No weapons, no combat, no impossible choices between following orders and doing what felt right. In a hospital, the mission is always clear. Keep people alive. There's no moral ambiguity, no sacrificing one person person to save many. Everyone gets treated. Everyone gets care. It seemed like redemption, like a chance to make up for the lives I'd cost. Nancy leaned forward. Did you ever consider that this information might be relevant to your employer? That we had a right to know we were hiring someone with your background? Honestly, no, I admitted. My military service ended. My nursing career began. They felt like separate lives, separate identities. I didn't think my past was anyone's business as long as I did my job well. And I have done my job well for 5 years, without a single complaint or incident. The lawyer made notes. The problem, Ms. Cross, is perception. If the media gets hold of this story, decorated Navy SEAL secretly working as a nurse, it creates complications. Questions about why you're hiding your identity. Speculation about what you might be hiding. It puts the hospital in an uncomfortable position. I'm not hiding anything illegal or dangerous, I protested. I just wanted privacy. I wanted to be Valerie the nurse, not Lieutenant Cross the SEAL. That's not a crime. No, but it is complicated, Nancy sighed. Here's what's going to happen. You'll undergo a complete psychological evaluation to ensure your PTSD is managed. You'll meet with our security team to discuss any potential threats from your military service, enemies, classified information, anything that could impact hospital safety. And you'll attend a mandatory meeting with your department to address the situation openly. If you pass all of those requirements, you can return to work. It felt like a punishment for honesty, but I nodded. What choice did I have? Lose this job? Start over somewhere else? Hope my secret stayed buried better the next time? I was tired of running, tired of pretending, tired of living in fear that someone would discover who I used to be. Maybe it was time to stop hiding, even if the consequences terrified me. As I left the office, I ran into Marcus in the hallway. His face was still bruised, stitches visible along his jawline, but he was dressed in surgical scrubs and clearly back at work despite his injuries. Typical doctor behavior, terrible patients, all of them. Valerie, wait, he called out. I need to apologize properly. I shouldn't have said anything last night. I was disoriented from the accident, not thinking clearly about what it would mean for you. I stopped, turned to face him. You told the truth. Can't really apologize for that. But I exposed you without your consent. I know you were trying to leave that life behind, and I destroyed that with a few careless words. I'm sorry. Looking at him, I saw the guilt in his eyes. Familiar guilt. The kind that comes from causing unintended harm despite good intentions. I recognized it because I saw the same guilt in my own reflection every day. Maybe that's what finally allowed me to forgive him. We were both carrying weight that didn't belong entirely to us, both trying to atone for things we couldn't change. You lived, Marcus. That's what matters. James and David died, and I have to carry that. But you lived, and you've had 10 years to do good in the world because of the choice I made. That has to count for something, right? Maybe that's enough. For the first time in a decade, I actually believe those words. Maybe saving one life was enough. Maybe I could stop punishing myself for surviving when others didn't. Maybe redemption wasn't about erasure. It was about integration, about learning to live with all the broken pieces instead of trying to bury them. 3 days into my suspension, I was at home trying to distract myself with mindless television when my phone rang. It was Dr. Chen, her voice urgent and tight with fear. Valerie, we have a situation at the hospital. Active shooter in the main lobby. Multiple casualties already. SWAT is 20 minutes out, and we're on lockdown. Her voice cut off, replaced by the sound of gunfire and screaming. My body reacted before my mind caught up. I was already moving, grabbing my car keys, running for the door. Every instinct I'd suppressed for 5 years roared back to life. The hospital was under attack. My colleagues were in danger. People needed help. And sitting safely at home was not an option, suspension or not. I made it to Seattle Grace in 8 minutes, driving like I was back in convoy operations, dodging hostile fire. The parking lot was chaos. Police cars, ambulances, terrified people running out of the building. I showed my hospital ID to the officer establishing the perimeter, told him I was a nurse and needed inside. He started to refuse until I looked him dead in the eye and said, I'm also a Navy SEAL with combat experience. I can help. Let me through. Something in my voice, my bearing, made him hesitate. Then he nodded and stepped aside. I entered through a side door used for deliveries, my mind automatically assessing the situation like I was back in hostile territory. Gunfire from the main lobby. Civilians trapped in various wings. Unknown number of shooters. No tactical gear. No weapons. Just my brain and my training. I found Dr. Chen barricaded in a supply closet with 3 nurses and 2 patients on portable oxygen. Their faces showed pure terror, the kind that comes from being utterly helpless in the face of violence. When they saw me, relief washed over them. How did you get in? Dr. Chen whispered. Doesn't matter. What's the situation? 1 shooter, maybe 2. They came in demanding medications, opioids, sedatives, everything. When security tried to stop them, they started shooting. At least 4 people hit, possibly more. We're trapped here. I evaluated our position. Supply closet on the 2nd floor, 1 exit, no windows. Terrible tactical position if the shooter came this way. The patients needed oxygen, couldn't be moved easily. Classic impossible situation. Protect civilians or neutralize the threat. Can't do both effectively. Listen to me carefully, I said, slipping into command mode without thinking. I'm going to create a distraction and draw them away from this wing. When you hear me engage, you move these patients to the surgical wing's safe room. It's reinforced, has a separate ventilation system, can be locked from inside. Don't stop for anyone or anything. Understand? Valerie, you don't have a weapon. You can't. I don't need a weapon to be effective. I need you to trust me and follow the plan. Can you do that? Dr. O. Chen stared at me, seeing clearly for the first time the person I used to be. The soldier. The SEAL. The woman trained to run toward danger instead of away from it. She nodded slowly. The others did too, putting their lives in my hands without question. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. I slipped out of the supply closet and moved through the hallways using skills I'd practiced 1,000 times. Silent footsteps, minimal exposure, eyes constantly scanning for threats. I could hear the shooter below, yelling demands, periodically firing shots to maintain fear. One person, male voice, emotional and unstable. Probably an addict desperate for drugs, not a trained killer. That gave me an advantage. Using my intimate knowledge of the hospital layout, I positioned myself above the lobby on the second-floor walkway. I could see him now, 30s, disheveled, wielding a handgun he clearly didn't know how to use properly. 3 people were wounded on the floor, including Marcus Reeves, who was trying to provide medical care while the shooter ranted. I picked up a fire extinguisher from the wall, weighed it in my hands. Not ideal, but it would work. I took a breath, centered myself, and became Phantom again, the silent operator who moved through chaos with purpose. I threw the fire extinguisher across the walkway, creating a loud crash that made the shooter spin around. Distracted. That's when I dropped down from the walkway onto a lower awning, rolled to absorb the impact, and came up behind him. He turned, swinging the gun wildly, but I was already inside his guard. Disarm technique from close quarters combat training. Control the weapon hand, strike the elbow joint, sweep the legs. He went down hard, gun skittering across the floor, and I had him pinned before he could process what happened. It's over, I said calmly, maintaining the hold. Don't move, don't fight, just breathe. Help is coming. The lobby erupted in motion. Hospital security emerged from cover. Marcus rushed to check on the wounded. Dr. Chen appeared with her group of patients now safely relocated, and I stayed there, holding down the shooter with techniques I'd learned in a different life, until police arrived and took custody. When they pulled me off him, adrenaline finally crashed, and I started shaking. Marcus was suddenly there, his hands on my shoulders, his voice cutting through the chaos. You're okay. It's done. You saved us. Everyone's going to be okay because of you. I looked around at the lobby, at the wounded receiving treatment, at the frightened people now safe, at my colleagues staring at me with a mixture of awe and fear. I'd revealed myself completely, shown them exactly who I was beneath the nurses' scrubs. There was no going back now, no more pretending. The question was whether they'd accept me or reject me for it. The aftermath of the shooting was a blur of police statements, medical examinations, and media attention I desperately didn't want. Someone had filmed the disarm on their phone, and the video went viral within hours. Navy SEAL nurse takes down hospital shooter barehanded. My face was everywhere, my story dissected by strangers online, my carefully protected privacy shattered beyond repair. The hospital administration called an emergency meeting. Nancy Williams, several board members, department heads, and my colleagues from the ER all gathered in the main conference room while I sat at the head of the table feeling like I was on trial. In a way, I suppose I was. They were deciding whether my actions constituted heroism or liability, whether I was an asset or a danger. Ms. Cross entered a locked-down hospital during an active shooter situation without authorization, the hospital's legal counsel began. She engaged a suspect without backup, without training for hostage negotiation, without following any established protocol. While the outcome was positive, the risk she took was enormous. The risk of doing nothing was greater. Marcus interrupted. He was sitting across from me, his voice firm despite his injuries. 4 people were shot. More would have died if Valerie hadn't intervened. SWAT was still 15 minutes out when she neutralized the threat. She saved lives, including mine for the second time. How is that not heroism? Because she's not law enforcement, the lawyer countered. She's a nurse. Her job is to provide medical care, not to physically engage armed suspects. What if she'd been killed? What if the shooter had taken her hostage? The liability issues alone. Are you hearing yourself, Doctor? Chen stood up, her usually calm demeanor replaced with barely controlled anger. You're discussing liability while ignoring the fact that Valerie risked her life to save ours. She has training most of us can't even imagine. She used that training to protect patients and staff when we were helpless. And now you want to punish her for it? The room erupted in debate. Some argued I'd overstepped my role. Others defended my actions as necessary. Valerie. I sat silently, letting them talk about me like I wasn't there, wondering if this was how it would end. Saved lives, but lost my career anyway because I couldn't fit neatly into the box labeled nurse. Finally, Nancy raised her hand for silence. Valerie, I need you to tell us truthfully. Are you still capable of being just a nurse? Can you go back to the job you were hired to do? Or will you always be a soldier first? It was the question I'd been asking myself for 5 years. Who was I really? The SEAL or the nurse? Phantom or Valerie? I'd tried to keep them separate, to be one or the other, but maybe that was the wrong approach. Maybe I'd been fighting integration when I should have been embracing it. I'm both, I said quietly. I'm a nurse with combat training. I'm someone who saves lives and will protect those lives using every skill I have. You're asking me to choose, but I can't. I won't. The training that makes you uncomfortable is the same training that allowed me to triage 15 accident victims efficiently, to stay calm during crises, to teach your residents how to handle trauma situations. It's all connected. I'm all of it together, and if you can't accept that, then I don't belong here. The room went silent. Nancy looked at the board members, some unspoken conversation happening through glances and subtle nods. Then she turned back to me. The suspension is lifted, effective immediately, but we're implementing new protocols. You'll lead emergency response training for all staff, The suspension is lifted, effective immediately, but we're implementing new protocols. You'll lead emergency response training for all staff, teaching crisis management techniques based on your experience. You'll also work with our security team to develop better active threat procedures. Your military background isn't a liability. It's a resource we've been foolish to ignore. I stared at her, hardly believing what I was hearing. Not fired, not exiled, accepted, maybe even valued for exactly who I was. All the complicated, contradictory parts of me. Dr. Chen was smiling. Marcus looked relieved, and even some of the board members were nodding in agreement. There's one condition, Nancy continued. Full transparency from now on. No more secrets. No more hiding parts of yourself. If something from your past could impact this hospital, we need to know about it. Can you agree to that? Yes, I said without hesitation. Complete transparency. You'll know everything. The meeting adjourned, and as people filed out, several colleagues stopped to shake my hand or pat my shoulder. The fear I'd seen in their eyes after the shooting had transformed into something else. Respect, maybe even admiration. They'd seen me at my most dangerous, and somehow decided I was still someone worth trusting. Marcus waited until the room emptied before approaching me. How does it feel, being seen for who you really are? I thought about the question, about 5 years of hiding, and the exhausting effort of maintaining 2 separate identities. Terrifying, I admitted, but also liberating. I'm tired of pretending to be less than I am. Tired of apologizing for surviving when others didn't. Maybe it's time to stop running from my past and start using it for something good. For what it's worth, James and David would be proud of you. I knew them too, remember? They wouldn't want you to spend your life punishing yourself for a choice you made in an impossible situation. They'd want you to live, to use everything you learned, to keep saving lives however you can. His words hit something deep inside me, a wound I'd been protecting for so long that I'd forgotten it could heal. Maybe he was right. Maybe carrying guilt wasn't the same as honoring their memory. Maybe the best way to respect their sacrifice was to stop wasting the life they'd helped preserve. Over the next few days, the media attention gradually faded. Another news cycle, another crisis, and the world moved on. But inside Seattle Grace Memorial Hospital, everything had changed. I started teaching monthly training sessions on crisis response, trauma management under pressure, and tactical thinking in emergency situations. Nurses, doctors, even administrative staff attended, learning techniques that might save lives someday. My relationship with colleagues shifted too. They asked questions now, wanted to hear stories about my military service, treated me like someone with valuable experience rather than a strange loner to be avoided. I slowly opened up, sharing carefully edited versions of deployments and missions, finding that talking about it was less painful than keeping it locked inside. Marcus and I developed an unexpected friendship built on shared trauma and mutual understanding. We'd both survived that explosion in Kandahar, both carried scars from that day, both struggled with survivors' guilt in our own ways. Having someone who understood without explanation was a gift I hadn't known I needed. But the most profound change was internal. I stopped seeing my past and present as competing identities and started recognizing them as chapters in the same story. I was Valerie Cross, nurse, former Navy SEAL, survivor, protector, someone learning to integrate all the broken pieces into something whole. Not perfect, not without regrets, but authentic in a way I hadn't been in years. The nightmares didn't disappear completely, but they lessened. The hypervigilance remained, but I channeled it into awareness rather than paranoia. And the guilt, well, that would probably always be there, but I learned to carry it differently. Not as a punishment, but as a reminder that every choice matters, every life matters, and sometimes doing the right thing means accepting consequences you never wanted. 3 months after the shooting, Nancy called me into her office again. I walked in expecting another administrative discussion, but instead found her sitting with 2 people I didn't recognize, a man in a Navy suit and a woman with the bearing of someone who'd spent time in uniform. "Valerie, this is Agent Morrison from the FBI and Commander Phillips from Naval Criminal Investigative Service," Nancy introduced them. My stomach dropped. Federal agents never brought good news. "Ms. Cross, we need to discuss your military service," Agent Morrison began. "Specifically, certain classified operations you participated in have become relevant to an ongoing investigation." I sat down slowly, mind racing through possibilities. "I signed non-disclosure agreements. I can't discuss classified information without authorization." "We're providing that authorization," Commander Phillips said, sliding papers across the desk. "One of your former teammates, Derek Sullivan, was arrested last week for arms trafficking. During interrogation, he mentioned several missions where protocols were violated. Your name came up repeatedly as someone who witnessed these violations. Derek Sullivan. I remembered him. Aggressive, borderline reckless, the kind of operator who saw rules as suggestions rather than orders. We'd clashed more than once during deployments, his methods too brutal even for combat situations. I'd reported concerns to my commanding officer, but nothing ever came of it. SEALs protected their own, even when they shouldn't. "What do you need from me?" I asked carefully. "Testimony. Sullivan's facing serious charges, but we need corroboration from team members who were present during specific incidents. Your record shows you filed complaints about his conduct on 3 separate occasions. We believe you have information crucial to the prosecution." I processed this slowly. Testifying meant revisiting missions I'd tried to forget, reliving trauma I'd worked hard to process, potentially making enemies of former teammates who might still view Sullivan as a brother in arms. It meant choosing between protecting the SEAL community or standing up for what was right, an impossible choice that felt sickeningly familiar. If I testify, what happens? Do I get protection? Does this hospital become a target? We'll provide security recommendations, but Sullivan's operation was focused overseas. Domestic threats are unlikely, Agent Morrison assured me. Your testimony could prevent weapons from reaching terrorist organizations. American lives are at stake. Of course they were. There was always something at stake. Always lives hanging in the balance of decisions I had to make. I looked at Nancy, who'd been silent through the entire exchange. She met my eyes with an expression that said the choice was mine, that the hospital would support whatever I decided. I thought about James Wu and David Martinez, about the cost of doing what felt right even when it violated orders. I thought about the person I'd tried to become, someone who saved lives, who protected the vulnerable, who didn't hide from hard truths, and I realized there was only one answer I could live with. "I'll testify. Tell me when and where." The agents looked relieved. They spent the next hour walking me through the process, the timeline, the security protocols. When they finally left, Nancy stayed behind with me in her office. "You're going to have a target on your back," she said quietly. "Even if Sullivan's people don't come after you directly, the SEAL community might see you as a traitor. They protect their own." "I know," I said, "but Sullivan's actions got people killed. He violated every principle SEALs are supposed to uphold. If staying silent protects him, then I'm complicit. I can't do that. Even if it costs you everything you've built here?" I smiled sadly. "I've lost everything before and survived. This hospital gave me a second chance at life, at meaning, at redemption. The least I can do is honor that chance by telling the truth, no matter how hard it is." Nancy nodded, something like pride in her expression. "For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. And whatever happens, Seattle Grace stands with you." Over the next few weeks, I prepared for testimony while continuing my work at the hospital. Marcus helped me process the emotional weight of returning to those memories, sitting with me during panic attacks when the past became too vivid. Dr. Chen ran interference with colleagues who asked too many questions, protecting my privacy while I dealt with federal investigators. The trial date approached, and I found myself thinking about James and David again. Would they approve of what I was doing? Would they see it as honoring their sacrifice or tarnishing the SEAL legacy they'd died for? I'd never know for certain, but I had to believe they'd want the truth to come out, that they'd prefer justice over loyalty to a broken system. The night before I was scheduled to testify, Marcus found me sitting alone in the hospital chapel. I wasn't religious, but something about the quiet space felt appropriate for the moment. "How are you holding up?" he asked, sliding into the pew beside me. "I keep thinking about all the choices that led here. Pulling you out of that building, leaving the Navy, becoming a nurse. Every decision felt impossible at the time, but they all somehow led to this moment. Like my whole life has been preparing me to stand up and tell the truth about what I saw." "Maybe it has been," Marcus said thoughtfully. "Maybe every hard choice we make is practice for the next one. You saved my life by defying orders. Now you're saving other lives by speaking truth to power. That's consistent, Valerie. That's who you are." I looked at him, this man whose survival had set everything in motion, and felt something shift inside me. Not peace exactly, but acceptance. I'd made the best choices I could with the information I had. Sometimes those choices cost more than I wanted to pay, but they were still the right choices. And tomorrow, I'd make another one by walking into that courtroom and telling the truth regardless of consequences. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for being here, for understanding, for giving me a reason to believe second chances are real." "You gave yourself that second chance," Marcus Marcus replied. I'm just grateful I got to witness it. Maww. The courtroom was exactly as intimidating as I'd imagined. High ceilings, wood paneling, a judge who looked like she'd seen every possible variation of human behavior and wasn't impressed by any of it. Derek Sullivan sat at the defense table with his lawyers, his expression carefully neutral, but I could feel his eyes on me as I approached the witness stand. I swore to tell the truth, sat down, and looked out at the gallery. Marcus was there, and Dr. Chen, and several nurses from Seattle Grace, who'd taken the day off to support me. Nancy sat in the back row, giving me a subtle nod of encouragement. I wasn't alone. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't face it alone. The prosecutor began questioning me about missions in Afghanistan and Iraq, about Sullivan's conduct, about the violations I'd witnessed and reported. I answered each question carefully, honestly, describing events I'd tried to forget. Sullivan's unnecessary violence against civilians, his theft of weapons for personal profit, his disregard for rules of engagement that were designed to protect innocent lives. The defense attorney tried to discredit me during cross-examination, painting me as someone with a grudge against Sullivan, someone who'd left the Navy under questionable circumstances, someone whose PTSD might distort her memories. I stayed calm, stuck to fact, refused to be rattled by implications or insinuations. Years of military discipline served me well. Isn't it true, Ms. Cross, that you disobeyed direct orders during your final mission? The defense attorney pressed. That 2 men died because of your insubordination? How can this court trust your judgment when you've demonstrated such poor decision-making? The question hit like a physical blow, but I'd been expecting it. I took a breath, looked directly at the jury, and answered with complete honesty. Yes, I disobeyed orders. I made a choice to save 1 life at the potential cost of others. 2 men died covering my unauthorized rescue. I carry that guilt every single day, but here's the difference. I made that choice to save a life, to prevent death. Mr. Sullivan made choices that caused death, that profited from death, that violated every principle we're supposed to uphold as members of the military. My worst decision was made trying to do good. His decisions were made for personal gain while wearing the uniform. That's not the same thing. The courtroom was silent. The defense attorney tried to recover, but the damage was done. I'd acknowledged my imperfection while drawing a clear line between mistakes made with good intentions and deliberate corruption. The jury would make their own judgment, but I'd told my truth as clearly as I could. After 3 hours of testimony, I was finally excused. I walked out of that courtroom feeling lighter than I had in years. Not because I'd won anything, but because I'd stood up for what was right, despite personal cost. I'd chosen truth over comfort, justice over loyalty, integrity over self-protection. Whatever happened next, I could live with that choice. The trial continued for another 2 weeks. Sullivan was ultimately convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Some former teammates reached out to thank me for my courage. Others sent messages calling me a traitor, saying I'd violated the brotherhood. I accepted both responses with equal grace, understanding that people would see my actions through their own lens of experience and loyalty. Life at Seattle Grace returned to normal, or as normal as life could be when you're known as the Navy SEAL nurse who took down a shooter and testified against a corrupt teammate. I continued teaching emergency response classes, continued working shifts in the ER, continued learning to live as my whole authentic self without apology or shame. Marcus and I developed a tradition of having coffee together every Sunday morning, talking about our weeks, our struggles, our small victories. He'd started a support group for healthcare workers dealing with PTSD and trauma, and I attended regularly, finding community with others who understood the weight of carrying difficult experiences. 6 months after the trial, Nancy pulled me aside with unexpected news. The board approved a new position, Director of Emergency Preparedness and Crisis Response. It's yours if you want it. You'd still work clinical shifts, but also oversee all crisis training, security protocols, and emergency procedures hospital-wide. Your military experience would be integral to the role, not something you have to hide. I stared at her, hardly believing it. A position created specifically for someone like me, where all my skills and experience would be valued rather than viewed with suspicion, where I could use everything I'd learned in both lives to make the hospital safer, staff more prepared, patients better protected. Yes, I said immediately. Absolutely, yes. This journey taught me that we can't run from who we were, but we can choose who we become. Every scar, every painful memory, every impossible decision brought me here, and today I use all of it to save lives in a different way. I'm Valerie Cross, nurse and former Navy SEAL, someone who learned that strength isn't about hiding your broken pieces, but about letting them catch the light. Now I want to know from you. Do you believe our past defines who we are, or can we completely reinvent ourselves? Leave your opinion in the comments. I really want to know what you think about it. If this story touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next emotional accounts of nurses who lived the impossible. And don't forget to watch the next recommended video. There's another incredible story waiting for you.